What's up guys, it's Kristen here today with my February and March wrap-ups. Because this is what happens when I procrastinate and get lazy and don't film when I should. I'm now stuck doing 2 months worth of wrap-ups and there's quite a few books to go through. Let's just get right into it and start off with what I think was one of the first books that I completed in February, and it was My Brilliant Friend by Elena Ferrante. I'm actually a little bit surprised I ever ended up reading this because I had such an ingrained, not hatred, but I wasn't gonna fall victim to the hype for this. I actually don't know what came over me to decide to finally pick it up, but shit, Ferrante, I loved this book. I know like everyone and their mother has already read this by now, but I really didn't know a lot going into it other than it's set in Naples and it's about a female friendship, which kind of sums up the book. It is difficult to describe. See why it can be quite polarizing and a love it or you're gonna hate it type book, because it is not plot driven necessarily. It is very much about the characters. I found myself just relating so many times to the main female characters and their relationship, Elena and Lila. Kind of scary at times how similar their experiences were to ones that I've had in my life. Absolutely love the setting of post-war Naples. This is not Eat, Pray, Love style, eating tons of pasta and tours through Tuscany. It is rough and dirty, and basically every situation is dealt with violence, and I love that it brings that constant tension to the book, that if somebody says the wrong thing to the wrong person, there's gonna be disastrous consequences. It ends off on this amazing cliffhanger that is so perfectly set up the entire book, then it comes to fruition on the last page, and I practiced great restraint in not picking up the sequel, which I now have and I will definitely be reading in April. Now from one of the best books that I read last month to probably, yes, definitely the worst, it is The Menagerie by Rachel Vincent. This is like everything I despise in books. Not buy into this fantasy alternate future type world for even one moment. Main character is just this terrible amalgamation of every YA heroine you've ever read, but with absolutely no depth to it, and practically nothing happens through most of this like 400 pages, and then the pièce de résistance, it is left wide open for a sequel. No. Did actually finish it though. I mean, I skim read it for most of the second half of the book because it is one of my book club books, so it's gonna be an interesting meeting this month. Then for the past 2 months I was continuing on with my buddy read of The Lord of the Rings with Adam from Memento Mori, Lisa from Lycan Books, and Kathleen Ann, as well as Richard has recently joined us, and so I read The Two Towers in February. And I only got halfway through The Return of the King in March. I think I just kind of needed a break after like 4 months of reading the books because we started with The Hobbit in December. Very much enjoyed The Two Towers. I wouldn't say more than The Fellowship. It was kind of like I liked different things about each book. I definitely say that The Return of the King has been my least favorite so far. I mean, I haven't finished it yet, so I can't really say. But it's funny because this is definitely the most action-packed of the books, and what everybody warns you about Lord of the Rings, and which I would too, is that a lot of it is nature descriptions. But I grew to really love that in the first 2 books. And then with this one, it's so much about the massive battle of Gondor, and I just find myself not being as interested and really missing those long passages. Overall thoughts on the books is, yes, they are very enjoyable, they are beautifully written, and I definitely think they're worth the read even if you're like me and you've seen the movie about 3 billion freaking times. There is much more to them. That being said, it is difficult to get away from the fact that you do know pretty much every single thing that's going to happen and how everything is going to end up. So for me, at least, that did take away from a lot of the enjoyment that I could have had. Then because I've still been feeling quite slumpish with my reading the past few months, I listened to quite a number of audiobooks. One that I finally abandoned in February, even though it's still saved on my phone because I don't know if I'll go back to it, is The Last of the Wine by Mary Renaud. This is set during the Peloponnesian War. It's considered this landmark in queer literature. This is kind of a consistent theme with all of the books that I DNF'd the past couple months, which yes, there are a few, is that they weren't offensive in any way. I wasn't hating them, I just wasn't excited about them, especially with an audiobook. Like when I'm half asleep on my way to work, I kind of need something to pick me up a bit, and this was doing the opposite. Another audiobook that I listened to was Six of Crows by Leigh Bardugo. I did read the Grisha books a few years ago, and I enjoyed the first one, but I really didn't like the second book. And so I was very hesitant to pick this one up, but the audiobook was great. I went off the recommendation of Mel from Books with Wings. It's this Ocean's 11 heist-style novel with this really great cast of characters, very addictive, fun read. One thing I really did enjoy about the other books is the whole world of the Grishas, so that was exciting for me to return to, and of course I was very excited to pick up the sequel immediately after, so I got Crooked Kingdom. But oh, Leigh Bardugo, you did it again! It's like the sophomore slump with her books. I really did not enjoy Crooked Kingdom. I ended up DNFing it. Again, it was not terrible. It just needed some serious editing, and there were way too many subplots that were not furthering the story. From my Try a Chapter Classics tag, I picked up The Trial by Kafka. This was very much outside of my comfort zone. I've never read any Kafka before. I've only heard about Metamorphosis and that it's very strange and weird. But obviously the first chapter just grabbed my attention, and I absolutely loved this book. Like, probably the best book that I've read so far this year. It's about a man named Joseph K. who is one morning awoken to some police investigators showing up at his apartment to tell him that he's been arrested, but they cannot tell him the reason why, and he can still, though, go about his day and still go to work and everything like that, but he has to come to regular meetings to check up on his trial. And you kind of give up very quickly on trying to figure out what he's been charged with, or if he's guilty of somehow doing something. It becomes more about the process of this trial, and it slowly takes over his life as he's trying to learn more about it. Kafka himself graduated with a law degree and worked in the legal system and was writing this at the time. And so the whole book is just kind of this over-the-top, ridiculous, absurdist critique of the legal system and bureaucracy, really writing about the things that he was seeing that he did not agree with. Everything in the legal system just seems backwards, that they are presumed to be guilty first, that nobody can get information besides the judges and the lawyers, that no regular person can understand the law, so they cannot properly defend themselves. Definitely worth a reread, and I obviously now want to get into so much more of Kafka's works, and I think this is a great starting point. Even though it is a classic, it is very readable. I see why it has been adapted to the stage so many times. It's so much rapid fire back and forth dialogue. And I also think it's a good starting place because it is this ridiculous, absurdist thing, but it's not so strange that you can't understand it the way that I think Metamorphosis might be a little bit more difficult. And now for the last of my DNFs this last couple months, it was Jihadi John, The Making of a Terrorist by Robert Verkaik. Very disappointing. I asked for this book for Christmas. I was so excited to read it. I am a political science junkie. Robert Verkaik is a journalist, and he realized at the time of the Jihadi John beheadings that he had actually met the man who was Mohammed Emwazi several years before, doing an article on him. This book, my problem, I mean, there was just pretty much no new information or nothing surprising to me, and he really couldn't get into the psyche. I mean, I don't think anybody can. Even Emwazi's parents don't really understand his motivations, let alone a journalist who met him a handful of times and exchanged a few emails. And really the whole book is just kind of a step-by-step, this happened and then this happened and this happened, which you could pretty much get from any general news article. And last but not least, we are finally at the end. I listened to the audiobook A House in the Sky, a memoir by Amanda Linhout. She was captured in Somalia by Islamic terrorists and taken prisoner for over a year. Amanda is a Canadian woman. This is probably my first Canadian memoir that I've read, actually. And she was working as a freelance journalist in many war-torn areas in the Middle East, and that's how she ended up in Somalia in the first place, and then eventually being captured. But it is the rule of many governments, particularly in the West, that they do not pay ransom, as I believe it will just encourage the problem. And as you can imagine, this one is incredibly difficult to read or listen to. In my case, where she's describing the tortures that she went through. There were definitely points when I had to take, a few days break from listening to it. I would highly recommend this one for almost the reasons that I said I did not like Jihadi John, that strangely enough, in a way, because she lived with these captors for over a year, she really tried to understand them and their motivations, and besides the fact that they were doing these horrific things to her, she really tried to just not see them as just villains, evil, that they were a product of their environment and the situation, and that human trafficking and kidnapping, it really is this massive business industry for terrorist groups all over the world. It's oftentimes their main income for financing operations. Very well written, of course, incredibly impactful, and again, educational though, with understanding these terrorist groups and their motivations, so I would highly, highly recommend this one. So that is it for all of the books that I read for the past couple of months. Of course, I'd love to hear your thoughts on these if you have read them. Please leave your thoughts in the comments down below. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you again soon. Bye!